The CFO cut the meal program. The nurse assistant was forced to steal to survive. Victor Stone, the billionaire heir in disguise, was sent to enforce zero tolerance. But upon witnessing Maya's sacrifice, he confronts the only truth his reports couldn't show him. The true cost of economy is the hospital's human soul. The clock is ticking. How Victor must choose between his inheritance and his conscience. The rough, thin polyester fabric of the blue scrubs chafed against Victor Stone's skin, a stark contrast to the Italian linen and silk he'd been wearing just 72 hours ago. Victor wasn't just undercover. He was in low-wage purgatory. 3 days as Vic, the new transport aide at Central Hospital, Branch 14, the worst-performing unit in his network, was already enough to make the corporate air conditioning of his Manhattan penthouse feel like a past life, a luxury fantasy. Victor Stone was, in fact, the heir and future CEO of the Stone Health Hospital empire. He was 35, and his net worth was a number most of his employees would never see. But his father, the octogenarian and relentless founder, had made a classic billionaire demand. 1 week, Victor. Go to Branch 14. Find out why the profit margin dropped 3% after our cost cuts. Prove you deserve the CEO chair. If you fail, the board appoints Patricia. Patricia Chin, the emotionless CFO, was the queen of cuts. Her memos were Bibles of bureaucracy, and her cost optimization directives had been the catalyst for the current operational disaster. She was responsible for eliminating the free staff meal program, a saving that, on paper, was worth millions, but which in reality was draining morale to the bone. Victor was there to validate Patricia's cost-cutting strategy, not to question it. But empirical experience was proving to be a harsher master than any Excel spreadsheet. He pushed an empty gurney down the quiet hall, his cheap rubber shoes slipping slightly on the worn linoleum. The smell wasn't disinfectant, but a pungent mix of cold coffee, industrial lavender, and an underlying layer of exhaustion, almost metallic. The main lobby floor had been designed for a cold, clinical shine, but now it reflected only flickering fluorescent lights, the cost savings cutting even basic maintenance. The night shift, in particular, was an exercise in sterile solitude and burnout. Staffing was minimal. 1 health technician, 2 registered nurses, and of course, the nursing assistants, NAs, the invisible backbone, who seemed to be in 10 places at once. The bureaucracy imposed from above meant that even if the emergency room was flooded, the manager couldn't approve overtime without a triple electronic signature, leaving the staff desperately overwhelmed. Victor paused at the nursing station, pretending to organize charts. The blue light from the computer screen illuminated the tired face of Nurse Sandra, a 40-year veteran with deep bags under her eyes. She was typing, but her eyes were empty, fixed on the screen. "Hey, Vic," she mumbled, without looking up from the monitor. "Can you take that pile of towels to the 3rd-floor supply closet? The morning supply request still hasn't been approved and we're running on fumes." "Sure, Sandra." "No problem," Victor replied, trying to sound monotonous and uninterested. He grabbed the basket. It was heavy. As he walked, Victor analyzed the scene. Branch 14 wasn't failing because of lazy employees. It was failing because financial engineering and corporate micromanagement had strangled the staff's ability to do their jobs. He was seeing the consequences of his own policies. Money was being saved on payroll and benefits, but was being lost in efficiency, turnover, and costly mistakes. The NA turnover rate, for example, was nearly 80% annually, a training cost nightmare that CFO Patricia hadn't accounted for. Victor reached the 3rd floor, an older, less frequented area reserved for long-term patients. He found the supply closet at the end of the hall, near the nocturnal rest wing. He opened the door, and the smell of linen and cleaning supplies hit him. As he unloaded the pile, he heard a noise coming from behind the large shelving units. A very soft sound, the clinking of plastic against porcelain and the slight tearing of wax paper. He froze. It was late. All NAs and health techs should have been at their posts or gone home. The silence of the night amplified the sound. Victor moved slowly, silently, as if walking on thin ice. He remembered Gary, the shift manager's memo. There have been reports of missing, undisposed food trays. This was corporate property theft. Exactly what he had been sent to investigate. A failure in cost control. He peered around the tall shelf of disinfectants and disposable gloves. The dim light of an emergency fixture in the corridor barely reached the back of the pantry. There she was. A female figure, her back to him, crouched on an overturned mop bucket. Her gray nursing assistant uniform was worn, and a small dark red stain, perhaps coffee or leftover sauce, was on her shoulder. In her hands, she held a rigid plastic container, the kind used for expensive soups for VIP patients. She was eating hastily, almost mechanically, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if waiting to be caught. It was Maya. Victor recognized her immediately. She was the nursing assistant who seemed to operate on an inexhaustible energy reserve. He had seen her on the morning shift, and she was still here, almost 16 hours later. Her face was almost completely hidden by her dark brown hair, but the line of her shoulders was tense, and the way she swallowed had an urgency that had nothing to do with casual hunger. This was the hunger of need, and what she was eating. He saw the container label. Lobster bisque. Refuse. It had been thrown away. It was in the trash. He watched, paralyzed. He was seeing in real time the direct human consequence of his own impersonal cost cuts. The theft was undeniable. The policy was clear. But the sight of that nursing assistant, the backbone of his hospital, hidden in the dark to eat a patient's leftovers, pierced Victor's shield with a strange, sharp pain. His corporate mission suddenly felt trivial and heinous. He stood there, frozen in the shadow, while Maya finished the soup. He saw that she didn't use a spoon. She was using the edge of the container to scrape up the last drop. The urgency in her movements was that of someone who fears being discovered every second. When she finished, she didn't throw the container away. She carefully wiped it clean with a single crumpled paper towel, folded it, and placed it in a worn backpack next to the bucket. She was saving the evidence, but also, perhaps, the container to use it again. She stood up, her movements rehearsed in quietness. She was sneaking out of the area, back to work or home, depending on where she was in her endless shift. Victor had to act. He had to confront her, or the truth about her situation would never be revealed. He took a step back, accidentally bumping into an empty supply cart, the sharp squeak of the wheels echoing in the silent corridor. Maya stopped immediately. Her head turned. The look on her face was not guilt, but a cold, desperate fear, like someone who has lost the last chance to survive. Would Victor maintain his cover and enforce the policy, or would the human reality of Maya's eyes force him to abandon his mission and face the bureaucracy he himself created? The sharp squeak of the empty supply cart's wheels broke the thin layer of silence protecting Maya Au as secret. The sound echoed, not as an alarm, but as a gong of inevitability in the flickering light hallway. Maya spun around, and her gaze hit Victor, still Vic, with the force of an electric shock. It wasn't the look of a caught criminal, but the look of a cornered animal that knew it had nowhere left to run. The fear in her eyes, a deep, exhausted brown, was a mix of shame and the grim acceptance that her last line of defense had failed. Victor, the CEO who decided on multi-million-dollar budgets in climate-controlled boardrooms, felt a strange heat rising up his neck. He was used to dealing with numbers, not the visceral consequence of policies he himself had endorsed. Policy said she was a thief. Her gaze said she was a desperate mother, or guardian. He kept his head down, his face hidden by the shadows, and began to move the cart, pretending he had just arrived. "Sorry," he muttered, keeping his voice in the monotonous tone of the new hire. "I didn't see you there. Just came to grab the rest of the towels. Sandra said the supply is cut again." Maya didn't respond. She didn't move. Her breathing was quick and shallow. Her body was still rigid, ready to flee or fight. the silence between them stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the hospital ventilation. Victor, knowing he had to neutralize the threat without exposing himself, took a step forward, approaching the area where she had been crouched. He intentionally looked at the floor, at his feet, avoiding her gaze, a tactic to reduce the perception of threat. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice slightly wavering. This wasn't the CEO's question. It was one human being to another, something he had forgotten how to do in years of board meetings. Maya finally moved. With the speed and precision of someone accustomed to hiding pain, she stood up, adjusted the worn-looking backpack on her back, and covered the area where the overturned bucket and container were. She instantly became the efficient, impenetrable nursing assistant. "I'm on my break," she said. Her voice was a husky whisper, but the tone was firm, almost defensive. "I was looking for supplies I needed. The ordering system is slow. I'm heading back to the wing now." It was an obvious lie. The cloth backpack, the haste in covering the spot. Victor knew that she knew that he knew. Central Hospital S bureaucracy did not allow for rest breaks in the middle of the supply closet at 1:30 a.m. "Right," Victor said, backing away. "The ordering system, yeah, always slow. Looks like they cut the IT staff too." He made a vague gesture, trying to shift the blame to the system, to the anonymous bureaucracy of his own empire. He was giving her a bureaucratic out. Maya hesitated, the first sign of uncertainty in her posture. Maybe he wasn't a snitch. Maybe he was just another exhausted coworker, just as frustrated as she was with the system's failures. "You're new," she observed, still suspicious, but with a flicker of curiosity. "Be careful. The manager, Gary, he's looking for cuts everywhere." That phrase, "cuts everywhere," cut Victor deeper than any expense report. He was the source of those cuts, and Gary was just the zealous executor. The hunt for petty theft, like the lobster bisque leftovers, was the manifestation of Patricia Chin, the CFO's mentality. "Got it," Victor nodded. "Thanks for the warning. I'll see you around, Maya." He used her name. He noticed the slight surprise in her eyes. No one here called him by his name except the manager, and NAs were rarely addressed by their full name. They were just work units. The use of her full name was a sign of recognition, of humanity. Maya hurried away, her steps soft and quick, disappearing down the corridor toward the long-term care wing. Victor stood there, in the dimness of the supply closet, the smell of clean linen now contaminated with the subtle fragrance of the discarded soup. He allowed himself a moment of internal monologue while unloading the towels. Policy says her corporate property is a $10 bowl of soup that was headed for the landfill. My spreadsheet says she's an operational cost that can be reduced. But my eyes saw the pure panic of someone whose survival depends on stealing what is trash. Patricia Chin didn't see this. I didn't see this. We cut the meal program, and instead of saving money, we created a leftover black market and turned the backbone of our hospital into criminals. Her turnover is our real loss. The cost of replacing an NA like Maya who can calm a patient in crisis, who works 16 hours without complaint, is astronomically higher than the cost of one damned soup. His corporate mission was now on a collision course with his moral compass. He had been sent to find the money leak and punish the thief, but he found the living proof that the real leak was dehumanization. The character test, after all, wasn't for Maya. It was for him. CEO Victor Stone was facing Vic, the transport aide, and the transport aide was winning. He left the supply closet. The hallway light seemed brighter now, more exposed. He had to know Maya's full story, the why that the HR manual and the cost-cutting spreadsheets ignored. He had to find out what forced her to risk her only livelihood. The clock was ticking before Gary installed cameras or initiated a full audit. He retrieved his corporate phone, carefully hidden in his civilian clothes, and sent an encrypted email to a trusted assistant. initiate an unofficial and completely discreet investigation into the HR records and personal situation of employee Maya V. Torres. Branch 14. Do not use Gary's channels. Use only external sources. Top priority. Report in 24 hours. He could no longer just observe. The bureaucracy failed Maya. The bureaucracy, his own, should be the one to save her. But to save her, he needed information that the system, designed to punish, would not provide. The loop of his life was inverted. He was about to use the full power of Stone Health to help a nursing assistant he should have fired. Victor's bureaucracy has been set in motion, but will the response arrive in time to stop manager Gary's witch hunt? What will the external report reveal about the truth behind Maya's hunger? The sun hadn't arisen yet when Victor, still under the guise of Vic, began his 4th day at Branch 14. The hospital atmosphere during the morning shift was palpable. It wasn't the healthy stress of medicine in action, but the toxic, silent tension of an environment where corporate mistrust had replaced camaraderie. Employees didn't seem exhausted by the work, but rather drained by being constantly watched and undervalued. Victor headed to the tiny, poorly ventilated office of the shift manager, Gary. Gary was the epitome of the zealous, low-level executor, a middle-aged man whose loose tie and crumpled coat suggested a life spent conforming to rules. He was the visible hand of Patricia Chin's blind bureaucracy. The smell of burnt coffee and old paper hung in the air like a heavy shroud. Gary stood in front of a noisy photocopier, reproducing dozens of memos. The title in bold letters was Zero Tolerance, Corporate Property Disposal Policy. "Morning, Gary," Victor said, forcing a new guy optimism. Gary barely looked up. "You're early, Vic. Don't expect overtime. The time card machine is set to ignore early clock-ins. Labor cost." This was the essence of the problem in a single sentence. The system was programmed to punish proactivity and save pennies. Victor felt a knot in his stomach. Understood. "By the way, I was in the supply closet last night. I heard some noises. Sounds like people are eating trash leftovers." Victor cast the bait, observing Gary's reaction, testing how far he was willing to go. Gary stopped copying and fixed Victor with a look that was a mixture of paranoia and satisfaction. "Ah, you noticed? Food inventory has been oddly low. Don't tell me you saw Torres. Maya, the nursing assistant." "I don't know names," Victor lied, maintaining Maya's anonymity. "But it looks like someone is hungry." Gary scoffed, grabbing the memos and hitting them against the table. "Hungry? Please. They get a 10% discount if they want to buy canteen food, Vic. 10%. The cost of living is high for everyone, but stealing leftovers? That's not hunger. That's lack of character. It's a protocol failure, that's what it is." He continued his monologue, which was less a conversation and more a repetition of corporate guidelines. "Patricia Chin, she warned me. 'Gary,' she said, 'if there's a money leak, you're the first on the chopping block. I'm the manager. My job is to protect Stone Health's assets. And you know what an asset is? It's that $10 lobster bisque. It's the mashed potatoes that weren't charged for. What's not in the dumpster is mine. It's the company's. If we want to be the high-performance hospital network, we can't have this kind of moral negligence." Victor leaned back against the door frame, his jaw tense. The corporate cynicism was thick enough to cut with a dull knife. He thought of Maya, the urgency with which she cleaned the discarded soup container. Gary was calling this desperate struggle to feed her siblings moral negligence. "What if it's genuine need?" Victor asked, pushing the limit. "You know, the nursing assistant salary is... The salary is the industry standard, Vic. Nobody is forced to work here." Gary interrupted him sharply, his voice rising. He pointed a finger at the memo. "But, for those who choose to work here, they follow protocol. I'm going to hang these notices everywhere. And what's more, the security department will be installing high-definition surveillance cameras in the kitchen and supply disposal areas tonight." Victor's heart skipped a beat. Tonight. The bureaucracy was moving faster than he expected. The truth about Maya would be captured and coded as a security incident before he could intervene. Any employee caught after midnight will be terminated immediately. No warning. The HR manual is very clear about theft, and Patricia Chin's manual is even clearer about manager accountability. I'm not losing my job over some stolen mashed potatoes. Gary tucked the memos under his arm, with the look of a satisfied hunter. You want to be a good employee, Vic? Keep your eyes peeled. And if you see Ms. Torres lurking around the disposal areas, you let me know. It's your loyalty test. Victor shook his head, forcing a neutral expression. Understood, Gary. Corporate loyalty. It's what moves the hospital. He walked away, feeling bile rising in his throat. Gary's loyalty test was Victor's character test. The CEO was being asked to turn in a heroine who was keeping her family alive, all for a handful of leftovers. Victor headed for the elevator. His assistant should have the report on Maya Torres in a few hours. He needed that information desperately. He needed a story, a fact, a bureaucratic loophole to turn Maya's termination into a PR nightmare for the hospital. He needed ammunition that would overpower Patricia Chin's cold policy. The camera would be installed at midnight. He had less than 15 hours. He saw Maya in the hallway, calming an agitated elderly patient. Her posture was pure professionalism, but her eyes showed the exhaustion of the world. She was the personification of the Branch 14 paradox. The most valuable, the most overworked, and now the most threatened by the system she served so devotedly. Victor had to act, but without blowing his cover, and crucially, without alerting Gary, the loyal watchdog of bureaucracy. The plan would have to be risky, and would involve using his true corporate power. He needed the truth about her life. He needed the report the ultimatum from Gary shrunk Victor's window for action to less than a day. The hospital bureaucracy is poised to condemn Maya. Will the report on her personal life arrive in time? And will it contain the critical information Victor needs to dismantle Patricia Chin's cost-cutting policy? The urgency imposed by Gary's ultimatum, surveillance cameras installed at midnight, turned Victor's observation into a feverish vigilance. He knew the bureaucracy system, designed to move slowly, was now racing to trap Maya. The time for Victor's character test was running out, and he still needed irrefutable proof that Patricia Chin's corporate policies were the real threat to Branch 14's health. Victor spent the next few hours acting as the efficient transport aide, but his eyes were fixed on Maya, the nursing assistant. He was looking for flaws, for laziness, for anything that could justify the minimum wage and the zero-tolerance policy he himself had blindly advocated. Instead, he witnessed a dedication that surpassed mere duty. It was mid-afternoon, and the hospital was at one of its unpredictable stress peaks. A growing agitation erupted in the long-term patient wing. Mr. Henderson, an elderly patient with advanced dementia and a history of verbal violence, was in full crisis. His sharp scream of fear and confusion echoed down the hallways, causing alarm in other patients. The nurses on duty were visibly stressed. Nurse Sandra, overwhelmed, was trying to administer an injection to sedate him, as per the aggressive restraint protocol. The protocol. Once again, bureaucracy dictating the human response. But before Sandra could administer the medication, Maya intervened. She moved with a calm and determined speed, positioning herself not in front, but to the side of Mr. Henderson, respecting the space of his confusion. Victor observed her in silence. Maya didn't use force. She used her voice. Maya's voice was usually low and hesitant, a whisper of exhaustion. But in that moment, it transformed. It was a soft, rhythmic, and deep voice, tuned not to give orders, but to comfort. She began to talk about Mr. Henderson's garden, mentioning specific details she had read in his chart, a skill of preparation and attention to detail that Victor knew was rare. "Where is your garden, Mr. Henderson?" "The one you told me about the red roses," she asked, repeating a phrase with cadence and validation. She didn't try to correct his reality. She entered it. The transformation was immediate and impressive. Mr. Henderson's tense body began to relax. His wrinkled brow softened. He stopped screaming and began to babble about his roses. In less than 3 minutes, Maya had achieved what nursing and the cost containment protocol, which avoided hiring specialized therapists, could not: re-establish calm. Nurse Sandra lowered the syringe, relieved and slightly ashamed. Victor, hidden behind a column, felt a chill run down his spine. He was witnessing an invaluable hidden skill that could not be quantified on an HR spreadsheet. This was the true cost saving, not cuts, but the investment in people with this level of empathy and emotional intelligence. But the moment of heroism was immediately followed by a silent sacrifice. The clock showed 2:30 p.m. It was Maya's break time, her only 30-minute window in a 12-hour shift that now stretched to 14. She had a small plastic container in her hand, likely containing something inexpensive from home, rice and beans or something similar. She headed to the break room, where Victor was pretending to wipe a table. She was about to open the container when co-worker Carlos, another NA, appeared, his face red with stress. "Maya, Jessica called in sick, and Mrs. Davids on the 5th floor needs to be repositioned, and I'm alone. No one else is available, and Nurse Sandra said protocol doesn't allow her to leave the station." The protocol, the bureaucracy. Maya looked at her food, then at Carlos, then at the clock. The conflict in her eyes was physical. In her world, her siblings' hunger, whose last meal had been his leftover soup the night before, was a priority. Her own hunger, not so much. But a patient's need was her vocation. She closed the container without taking a single bite and put it back in her backpack. "I'll take care of it, Carlos." "Go to the 5th floor," she said, her voice returning to the whisper of exhaustion, but carrying the silent authority of sacrifice. Carlos didn't even thank her properly. He just sighed in relief and rushed out. Maya turned around and went to the wing alone, skipping her only break and missing her only chance to eat. Victor watched her disappear, his stomach growling not from hunger, but from justified anger. That small act of giving up her only moment of rest for a colleague and a patient, an act that reduced the risk of pressure ulcers in Mrs. Davids and minimized medical error in the overworked unit, was invisible to the HR system. There was no field on Patricia Chin's spreadsheet for personal sacrifice value. Victor felt his disguise become not just a farce, but a blasphemy. He was wearing the uniform of someone who sacrificed everything for her profession, while he, the CEO, had sacrificed her well-being for a 3% profit. At that moment, his corporate phone vibrated with an email notification. It was from his assistant, Oliver, off hospital channels. The report on Maya V. Torres had arrived. Victor retreated to the most isolated men's restroom and opened the attachment, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was about to discover the truth. He needed unquestionable facts to dismantle the bureaucratic machine before Gary's camera caught Maya taking the next food scrap. The report was concise, factual, but devastating. The file title was Torres Case, Social Risk Analysis. The isolated third-floor restroom, designed with cold white tiles, became the epicenter of Victor Stone's moral crisis. The cruel fluorescent light reflected on the email from his assistant, Oliver. Torres Case, Social Risk Analysis. Victor, the CEO disguised as a janitor, opened the file, and the coldness of the corporate report collided with the image of Maya sacrificing her lunch. The report was a masterpiece of inhuman bureaucracy. Oliver had dug deep into HR records, denied assistance requests, and, crucially, external references. The first point hit Victor like a punch. Personal status: orphan, sole legal guardian. The body of the report detailed, Maya V. Torres, 24, was the legal guardian of 2 younger siblings, Isabel, 6, and Leo, 8, since the death of their parents in a car accident 18 months ago. Her mother, also a nursing assistant, had worked at Branch 14 for nearly a decade, dying on the commute home after an unpaid double shift, trying to compensate for hour cuts. Victor's internal monologue. Her mother worked for me. She died on the way home after a shift we were exploiting, and now the daughter is stealing trash to keep her family alive. My God, the bureaucracy didn't just fail them. We broke them and keep charging them for the piece. The second point was about salary and benefits bureaucracy. Income versus cost of living. The report showed that Maya's salary of $14.50 per hour, industry standard as Gary had claimed, totaled approximately $2,220 per month. The document highlighted in bold, emergency assistance request denied. Maya had used the Employee Hardship Fund twice in the last 6 months. Both requests were automatically denied by the algorithmic screening system, which deemed her above the minimum eligible poverty line due to her gross income. The HR system, designed by Patricia Chin to prevent benefit fraud, only considered gross income, ignoring the real cost of housing and the number of dependents. That's why she's eating the trash, Victor thought, the phone shaking in his hands. The system told her she was too rich to be hungry. The bureaucracy created a cruel paradox. She earns enough not to be considered poor by the company, but not enough to buy dinner. She is trapped in the hell of working poverty. The third point addressed the impact of cost cuts. Incident correlation. The theft of leftovers began exactly 4 months ago, coinciding with the elimination of the free staff meal program. Before the cost cut, Maya had purchased most of the food for her siblings at the canteen, using the meal subsidy program. With the cut and the now insignificant 10% discount, she could no longer afford it. The report ended with a line that seemed to summarize all the injustice. Employee Torres is rated as high retention value due to her low error rate and patient satisfaction, but is at high risk of termination due to financial instability. Victor felt the cold, calculated anger of a CEO mix with the moral fury of a betrayed man. The system he oversaw was not only inefficient, it was immoral. He had focused on hunting leftover thieves, when the real crime was the corporate policy that created the theft. He left the restroom, his disguise now a play that suffocated him. He needed a public reversal that would demoralize the policy, not just save Maya. He needed to expose the algorithmic cruelty of Patricia Chin and the complacent gaze of his own father. Midnight was fast approaching, and Gary was preparing for the hunt. Victor knew that confronting Gary on the spot wouldn't be enough. He needed an audience. He needed witnesses. He needed to use the bureaucracy to destroy the bureaucracy. He walked quickly to the nursing station, where the central computer, filled with admission forms and medical charts, was the headquarters of the night shift operation. He stopped next to Sandra and pretended to adjust a gurney. His heart was hammering in the rhythm of urgency. He had to act before the sun set and the camera installers arrived. Victor's revenge would not be violent, but strategic and corporate. He had to turn Maya's case into a crisis memo so potent that it would force the board to intervene immediately. The game now was chess, not checkers. He waited for the moment Sandra stepped away for a minute, grabbing a coffee. With a quick, rehearsed movement, Victor sat down in Sandra's chair and accessed the corporate intranet system. He didn't look for medical records. He looked for emergency communication channels. He found the distribution email for legal risk crisis communication, a channel that should only be activated in cases of severe medical error, data breach, or disaster. Victor began to type, and his insider knowledge spilled onto the keyboard. The subject line was a bomb. Urgent, Branch 14. Extreme reputation, risk and exposure of illegitimate labor practices. The revelation of the truth was just one click away, but if he clicked, his disguise would be destroyed, his investigation compromised, and his future as CEO put at risk. His father's bureaucracy was about to feel an earthquake. The click of a send was the point of no return, the moment Victor Stone would cease to be a bystander and become a corporate agitator. How would the board, obsessed with image and profit, react to the bombshell about the starving nursing assistant? And what would happen next to Gary, the blind enforcer, and Maya, the silent victim? Victor's fingertip hovered over the send button. The act was not just the end of his disguise, it was the start of a corporate war against his own father's policy and Patricia Chin's coldness. The monitoring light on the nursing station screen illuminated the tension on his face. He had less than 7 hours before Gary's cameras went live. Here we go. Victor muttered, his voice hoarse. He clicked. The legal risk crisis communication email was fired off to the 12 members of the Stone Health Executive Board, including his father, the founder, and Patricia Chin, the CFO. The body of the message, written with the cold precision of a CEO, but the fury of a transport aide, detailed the Torres case. Not as a theft, but as an extreme reputation risk incident. He used the board's own language. Urgent. Branch 14. The staff meal cost-cutting program has resulted in a high-performance nursing assistant, Maya V. Torres, being forced to consume trash leftovers to feed her 2 orphaned siblings, ages 6 and 8. The HR Hardship Fund's algorithmic system denied her assistance, labeling her above the poverty line based on gross income, ignoring the true cost of living. Local management, Gary W., is poised to terminate her tonight for theft of corporate property, zero-value food destined for disposal. If this story leaks, and the media loves CEO starves their healthcare heroes, the cost of reputational damage to Stone Health will exceed $50 million in market value within 48 hours. Corporate policy, not the employee, is the source of the risk. Victor abruptly stood up from the chair, the noise startling Nurse Sandra, who was returning with her coffee. "Vic, what are you doing?" she asked, confused. Victor ignored her. He knew the board would react to financial fear much faster than to morality. The email was a profit and loss bomb. 20 minutes later, chaos erupted. The landline at the nursing station exploded with calls. Sandra's cell phone, which had been on silent, vibrated incessantly with high-priority email alerts. Gary, who was in the back room preparing the termination forms, rushed out, his face white. "What the hell is going on, Sandra? My phone is... The CEO? I got an email from Richard Stone himself. What is this extreme reputation risk nonsense?" Gary was hyperventilating, bureaucratic control slipping through his fingers. Victor realized it was time to publicly unmask and seize control of the narrative. He positioned himself in the center of the nursing station, where most of the afternoon and night staff, about 15 people including Maya, who had just returned after attending to a patient, were gathered in confusion. "Gary," Victor said, his voice no longer the murmur of the transport aide. It was clear, strong, and loaded with unquestionable authority. "I think the bureaucracy needs an explanation." Gary turned, irritated. "Vic, get back to your cart. You are under investigation for..." Victor didn't let him finish. He ripped off the blue scrubs, throwing them onto the dirty floor. Underneath, he wore the linen dress shirt he had saved in his backpack, the uniform of his true power. "My name is not Vic," he declared, and the silence that followed was so deep that the buzzing of the lights seemed loud. "I am Victor Stone. I am the de facto CEO of this network, and I have been undercover for 4 days." The shock was instantaneous. Sandra dropped her coffee cup. Gary looked like he had been struck by lightning, his face shifting from panic to the deepest red of betrayal. Maya, who was near the ice machine, recoiled, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with incredulous, exhausted surprise. You're Richard Stone's son?" Gary stammered, his voice failing. "You were spying on me?" "I was assessing operational efficiency," Victor corrected. "And guess what? Branch 14 is perfectly efficient, Gary. It's efficient at turning heroes into thieves." Victor turned to the stunned staff. "You want to know why this branch is failing? It's not because of laziness. It's because policies made by people who have not set foot in a hospital in a decade, including me until 4 days ago, cut the moral backbone of this company. The meal cut policy and the hardship fund algorithm denied Ms. Torres the ability to feed her family." He then pointed at Gary. "This man, Gary, is a loyal executor of the bureaucracy that tells us it is more important to protect a leftover bowl of lobster bisque than to protect the nursing assistant who just saved a patient from sedation and works 16 hours a day. The theft is not hers. The theft is corporate. We stole the time, dignity, and food from our employees. Gary's phone rang, a jarring melody. He answered, still shaking. His side of the conversation was a series of terrified whispers. "Yes, Mr. Stone. Yes, I received the email. I understand. The termination will be immediately halted. Yes, Mr. Stone." Gary hung up, his face a mask of bureaucratic defeat. He looked at Maya, whom he was about to ruin. "Maya Torres," Gary said, his voice low and humbled. "You are not terminated. The termination process has been halted by direct order of the Stone Health Corporation." The staff erupted in murmurs. Maya did not move, still processing the sudden reversal caused by her transport colleague. Victor knew his father's order was only a damage control measure. The bureaucracy had retreated, but it had not been dismantled. The board was panicking about reputation risk, but the policy was still in place. The battle was far from over. The termination was suspended, but the structural injustice remained, and Victor had to use it as leverage. He approached Gary, his gaze focused. "Gary, gather everyone in the break room. Now. I need a meeting that isn't about cost cuts, but about human capital investment." Victor grabbed his personal phone, ignoring the incoming call from his father. He had to talk to Maya, but first, he had to consolidate his position in front of the bureaucracy's enforcers. The renegade CEO, Victor Stone, is now in command of Branch 14. What will he do in the emergency meeting to turn a mere suspension of a dismissal into a permanent structural reform? And, most critically, how will he use Maya, the silent heroine, to confront the cold logic of the board, now hanging on to every word he speaks? The break room at Branch 14, usually a refuge of exhausted silence and solitary microwaves, was now pulsating with an electricity of shock and hope. Gary, pale and defeated, gathered the staff as ordered. Around 15 nursing assistants, health technicians and nurses were squeezed between the broken coffee machine and the notice board full of bureaucratic compliance guidelines. All eyes were on Victor Stone, in his crumpled but imposing linen shirt, at the center of the room. Maya stood in the back, her expression unreadable, instinctively guarding against the possibility that this was all a cruel hoax. Victor wasted no time on sentimentality. He knew the board, which was monitoring the situation via silent conference call, a bureaucracy he knew well, would only understand the language of financial risk and human capital. "Thank you for being here," Victor began, his voice strong. "I've been here for 4 days, not as CEO, but as one of you. And what I saw was an operational breakdown caused not by inefficiency, but by a toxic micromanagement policy." He turned to Gary. The confrontation with the enforcer was the first and most important step of the reform. "Gary," Victor dictated, without raising his voice but with steel authority, "I have your leftover audit report. I have the cost of the cameras you were going to install tonight. And I have the termination memo for Ms. Torres." Gary tried to interject. "Mr. Stone, I was just following Ms. Chin's protocol." "I know the protocol," Victor cut in, his eyes locked on Gary's. "And that's why you are being reassigned at this moment. Gary, as of this instant, you are no longer the shift manager. You will be reassigned to a document filing role in the central office basement indefinitely. Your failure was not in following the rule, but in failing to prioritize human life over an insignificant operational cost." The collective gasp from the staff was audible. Gary's oppressive bureaucracy had come to an end, and he was removed with the same impersonality he applied to others, an immediate and ironic reversal. Victor then turned to the staff, holding a printed copy of the Torres Case Social Risk Analysis Report. "You see this employee, Maya V. Torres?" He pointed to Maya, who flinched slightly under the spotlight. "The Human Resources System, under Patricia Chin's directives, assesses this woman as a high-performing work unit, but simultaneously labels her as above the eligible poverty line due to her gross salary of $14.50 an hour." He crumpled the report with controlled anger. "What the system didn't assess is that this salary leaves Maya with less than $170 per month to feed her orphaned siblings. This policy, which I endorsed, turned our hospital's garbage into the only source of nutrition for 2 small children. This is not a protocol failure. It is an incalculable reputation risk and a moral failure of our corporate mission. Victor continued, now directing his words to the silent conference call of the board. Effective immediately, Central Hospital is implementing the following human capital investment guidelines. Meal policy reversal. The free meal program for all employees on all shifts will be immediately reinstated across the entire Stone Health network. This is not a cost, it is a productivity and morale safeguard, and it will not be cut again. Immediate salary increase. The salary of all nursing assistants, NA, home health aides, HHA, and medical assistants, MA, across all branches will be increased by 25% immediately. He looked at the staff, whose eyes widened in shock. This is an emergency market adjustment to reflect the true value of your work and the real cost of living. The cost of turnover and error is greater than this increase. Promotion and recognition. Victor walked closer to Maya. Ms. Torres has demonstrated unmatched patient calming skills and professionalism, even under conditions of stress and hunger. She will be immediately promoted to NA training supervisor with an additional salary increase and guaranteed hours, and will be responsible for training other staff in the human validation technique she utilizes. The silence was broken by hesitant applause, which quickly escalated into a standing ovation. For the first time in years, these employees felt that their invisible value had finally been recognized. Maya, tearful but standing straight, only whispered a "Thank you, Mr. Stone." Victor knew the battle on the board was still ongoing. Patricia Chin would be fuming. But he had used the language of bureaucracy, financial risk, to introduce humanity into the system. He had rescued Maya, and in doing so, had proven his point about the true cost of the cuts. But he still needed to address the last and most difficult challenge, the status quo of his relationship with his father and the board. He had dropped the bomb. Now, he needed to manage the fallout. The shock of the turnaround echoed through Branch 14. Victor had used the board ES on fear of a public relations crisis to force change, but his father, the founder, had yet to speak. What final gambit, what ultimate twist would Victor have to make to ensure the reforms became permanent and not just a gesture of damage control? The noise of the ovation in the break room subsided, but the silence on Victor's phone was louder. His call back to his father, Richard Stone, the founder and chairman of the board, was the moment of truth. Victor stepped out into the empty hallway, leaving the staff to absorb the shock of the reforms. He knew the drastic actions he took, the 25% salary increase and the reinstatement of free meals, would be reversed in less than 24 hours, unless he won against the patriarch of bureaucracy. He answered the call. Victor Anthony Stone. Richard's voice, thick and full of decades of authority, thundered from the other side. What in the hell was that email? You caused a public relations panic we could barely contain, and now you're promising millions of dollars in salary increases without board approval. Are you trying to sabotage me? Victor straightened his spine. His tone was that of a CEO, not a son. Father, I am not sabotaging you. I am saving the reputation that Patricia Chin was destroying with her short-sighted cuts. The termination of an orphaned nursing assistant who was feeding her siblings with leftovers would have been the headline of the year, costing us far more than a 25% raise. Don't give me the sentimental morality. I sent you to find the leak, not to give the hospital away to the employees. And Gary? You demoted him? He was a loyal executor of corporate policy, and Patricia Chin is demanding your immediate resignation for insubordination. Richard sounded like he was banging on the table. Gary was loyal to the spreadsheet, not the mission, Victor countered. And as for Patricia, I challenge her resignation, not mine. I have the facts. Patricia's meal cut policy and assistance algorithm ensured that Maya Torres, our most valuable employee, was forced to steal to survive. I have the proof that our bureaucracy, and not the employees, is our liability. He took a deep breath, preparing for the final gamble. Father, this is my ultimatum. I am wagering my inheritance and my position against your corporate myopia. You can overrule my reforms, reverse the salaries, reintroduce the meal cuts, fire Maya again. But if you do, I promise I will leak the full Torres social risk report to the New York Times and the healthcare trade press tomorrow morning. I expose how the Stone health system treats the backbone of its healthcare system. The result will be a PR disaster. The silence on the other end was deafening. Victor was using the tools of the coldest capitalism, fear of the press and falling stock values, to advocate for the human cause. You wouldn't dare, Richard whispered, the threat clear, but with a hint of hesitation. I've been here for 4 days, Father. I lived on their salary. I smelled the stress. I saw Maya's sacrifice. Do you think I care more about your chair than about my conscience? Victor asked, the emotion finally surfacing. If you fire me, I become a moral whistleblower with all the corporate secrets and an arsenal of proof that our algorithmic system prioritizes profit over life. Think of the litigation and reputational damage. Richard, the man who built the empire based on risk control, was cornered. He couldn't risk a public scandal, especially one involving the company abandoning orphans. Patricia Chin's bureaucracy had created the perfect Achilles heel. Finally, Richard Stone sighed, not in defeat, but in strategic acceptance. Very well, Victor, Richard said. I will not overrule your reforms. The salary increase and free meals will stand. You won the battle, but you haven't won the war yet with the board, and Patricia Chin will try to dismantle you. And what about your resignation and Patricia's accusations? I am not resigning, Victor said, seizing full control. I am demanding a vote of confidence from the board next week. My proposal will be, the Stone health systems will be led by Victor Stone and his human capital reforms, or by Patricia Chin and her cut policy. And I want your leadership to be judged by the ability to value the employee. Richard laughed, a dry, joyless sound. You are more ruthless than I thought. You used my own fear to force me to endorse your morality. The reviravolta is that, in trying to replace me, you proved you are the only one qualified for the job. Richard hung up. The silence returned. Victor had secured the reforms for Maya and the team. The changes were no longer a damage control gesture, but a permanent corporate policy, enforced by the fear of scandal. Victor returned to the break room, where Maya was still standing, processing the avalanche of events. He called her aside, for a moment of privacy. Maya, he said, taking out a pen and notepad. The promotion and the raise are permanent, but the bureaucracy still has its grip. I need your help to ensure the system doesn't ignore people like you anymore. What do I need to do, Mr. Stone? She asked, her voice still filled with respect and reverence. First, can you please call me Victor? And second, I need you to show me what the bureaucracy cannot see. Would you accept a gamble with me? Victor challenged her, extending his hand, not as her boss, but as his partner in reform. He had secured her future, but he needed her testimony and her morality to win over the board next week. Victor has secured Maya's future, but the final gamble is dangerous. He needs her human testimony to defeat the board for good and dismantle the bureaucracy from within. What hidden skill will Maya reveal to Victor that will help him craft the most powerful speech of his career? The office of the former manager Gary, a cramped space, now symbolically purified by the removal of its bureaucratic executor, became Victor's revolution headquarters. It was 1 a.m. Most of the Branch 14 staff had gone home with new hope and a guaranteed raise, but Victor and Maya remained. Victor was hunched over his laptop, preparing the most important slide presentation of his career. Maya sat in Gary's chair, her face illuminated by the screen, finely rested but tense. Victor needed more than numbers to win over the board, dominated by technocrats like Richard Stone and Patricia Chin. He needed a language that could penetrate corporate cynicism. Victor, Maya began, her voice more confident after the promotion and recognition. You secured my future and that of my siblings. But the board, they've never seen the pain on a hungry child's face. They only see the free cafeteria cost line. That's exactly why we need your hidden skill, Maya, Victor replied, standing up and pacing. You showed me how to calm Mr. Henderson, a patient in crisis, using the validation technique. You didn't confront him with reality. You entered his world. I need you to teach me how to do the same with the board. They are in a cost of living crisis, where they only see numbers. I need to validate their reality, the fear of losing money, and then, subtly, introduce our reality, the human cost. Victor held out a sheet of paper. It was a draft of his speech. The main section was bolded. The true cost of NA turnover. I'll attack them with their own logic, Maya. We'll prove that indifference is, in fact, a high operational cost. My father and Patricia only understand a bar chart. What is the argument that will force them to feel? Maya took the paper, and her eyes focused, not on the text, but on the gaps between the words. She smiled slightly, a smile of silent wisdom. You're focusing too much on the cost of turnover and not enough on the cost of indifference, Maya explained, turning to the monitor. Patricia Chin's protocol removed the food, but it removed something more expensive: dignity. No one does a good job when they are afraid of being caught stealing to feed their family. She began to weave a narrative, a language of empathy Victor could never use alone. Don't use turnover statistics. Use the pain of recruitment. Tell the board, the cost of training a new nursing assistant to replace Ms. Torres isn't just her salary for 3 months. It's the cost of a dementia patient in crisis whom the new person won't know how to calm. It's the cost of a preventable infection if the employee had to skip hand washing because they skipped their break. It's the cost of our mistake that insurance doesn't cover. Human error caused by exhaustion. The cost-cutting policy didn't save money. It turned human capital into legal liability. Maya continued to instruct Victor. The board prides itself on best outcomes. Tell them that morality is our best medicine. Free staff food is an investment in error prevention. It's a shield against burnout. It's not a cost. It's an insurance policy against lawsuits caused by exhaustion and desperation. If you validate their fear of lawsuits and financial loss, they will accept the meal program as a risk mitigation measure. Victor was amazed. Maya was using the bureaucratic argument, legal risk mitigation, to defend the human cause, free meals, reversing Patricia Chin's own logic. He was seeing the hidden skill, her ability to see the fine line between the rule and the need. You're brilliant, Maya. You've given me the key, Victor exclaimed. He reframed his speech, replacing cost of living charts with charts of operational risk versus dignity investment. He would use the board's own language against them, validating the fear of loss to sell empathy. The sun was beginning to rise over the concrete horizon, painting the skyline a grayish white, a new day at Branch 14. Victor shook Maya's hand, feeling the strength in her grip, not just as an employee, but as a partner. Thank you, partner, he said. I'm going to Manhattan. I'm going to win this vote. And when I get back, Stone Health will have a new moral foundation. I promised you this wasn't just a damage control gesture. I'm going to make it permanent. He had the strategy, the evidence, the Torres report, and the new language of corporate empathy. But he still needed the final approval from the board. The vote was scheduled for late afternoon, and he knew Patricia Chin had already prepared the cost counter-offensive. Victor's reviravolta depended on how he could connect the fate of a nursing assistant with the financial destiny of a billion-dollar empire. The executive board meeting room, in the penthouse in Manhattan, was a temple of marble and glass, with an impersonal view of the city. 10 stoic figures, including Richard Stone, the founder, and Patricia Chin, the CFO, with her cold expression of disdain, sat at the table. The final confrontation was not between Victor and them, but between the cold spreadsheet and the visceral reality Victor had brought back to the upper echelon. Victor Stone, dressed in a suit he hadn't worn for a week, stood at the front with the projector on. He began the presentation with the most austere slide possible. Operational Risk Analysis, Branch 14. He ignored Patricia Chin's cost savings charts. Instead, he used the language of bureaucratic empathy that Maya had taught him. "Gentlemen, ladies of the board," Victor began, his voice calm and serious. "The cost of maintaining the status quo at Branch 14 is $50 million in reputational value and incalculable litigation risk. The operational error is not human-sourced, it is systemic-sourced. We cut free meals to save $1 million per year. That cut, however, introduced the Maya Torres factor." He slid the slide to the Torres case with data from the report. Guardian of orphans, gross income above limit, forced to steal trash, high retention value. Patricia Chin scoffed. "Victor, this is cheap sentimentalism. It's theft, and protocol demands termination. We cannot set a precedent for every struggling employee." Victor turned to her, his gaze sharp. "Ms. Chin, you are correct. Protocol demands termination, but litigation risk and reputation risk demand your resignation. Allow me to validate your reality. What you fear is loss of shareholder value, and I am here to prove that lack of employee dignity is an immediate financial liability." Victor clicked to the final slide. It was not a bar chart. It was the transcription of Maya's words, written in a clear, unmistakable font. "Free food is not a cost. It's an insurance policy against lawsuits caused by exhaustion and desperation. It is an investment in error prevention." Victor looked directly at his father. "Father, we forced a nursing assistant, whose mother died serving our company, to choose between feeding her family and committing a protocol error that could cost a patient's life. The cost of recruiting and training someone to replace Maya's talent and emotional stability, who calmed a patient in crisis in 3 minutes, is greater than the cost of 1,000 meals. We will not lose millions because of human negligence. We will lose millions because of inhumane bureaucracy. The 25% salary increase and free meals are a legal risk mitigation measure. They eliminate the incentive for theft and reduce the risk of human error." The argument, framed in the language of risk and profit, hit the board. Richard Stone nodded slowly. Patricia Chin was isolated. "Victor," Richard said, his voice softer now. "You proved that the reputation risk is unacceptable. You validated our fear." He turned to Patricia. "Ms. Chin, your cuts policy failed to recognize the full cost of human capital. Your position is under immediate review." The vote followed. By a margin of 9 votes to 3, Patricia's and her allies, the board endorsed Victor Stone's reforms permanently. The spreadsheet bureaucracy had lost to the nursing assistant's reality. The story's conclusion. The late recognition. With the vote concluded, the fate of Stone Health was sealed. Victor not only became the uncontested CEO, he became a new kind of leader, one who understood the base of the pyramid, Maya's fate. Maya V. Torres became the Director of Nursing Assistant Wellness and Training for the entire Stone Health network, earning a salary that permanently lifted her out of poverty and allowed her to raise her siblings with dignity. Her human validation technique became the new training standard, ensuring that empathy was officially encoded into the hospital's protocol. Victor's fate. Victor Stone, the former janitor, brought the raw reality of the front lines to the top of corporate power. He transformed Stone Health into a market leader in employee satisfaction and retention, proving that employee dignity is the highest profit margin. His father, Richard, retired with pride. The end of blind bureaucracy. Maya's story wasn't just about a soup theft. It was about how the spreadsheet system created to save money ended up costing the company its soul. The blind bureaucracy was dismantled and replaced by a protocol that measured the cost of indifference. The story of Victor Stone, the CEO who went undercover to save a nursing assistant, concludes with the proof that the best leadership is not in the charts, but in the silent service of those who keep the world running.